In the 19th century, England joins global trade, bringing silks and spices from other colonies, but unfortunately, they accidentally bring the zombie virus. Soon, these monsters are all over the country. Millions of people die and rise as zombies, hungry for brains. Healthy citizens begin studying deadly martial arts from China and Japan. Eventually, the government builds the Great Barrier, a 100-foot wall that surrounds London, then adds to the Royal Canal a very deep trench encircling both the city and its walls. The land between the wall and the trench is known as the Intermediate. During the Second Battle of Kent, one of the bridges over the canal is breached, and the zombies kill all the villagers in the Intermediate, driving the king mad. After the battle ends, he orders the destruction of every bridge except one. Soon, nobles and ladies abandon London to live on their own fortified estates. One day, Colonel Darcy arrives at an estate in Hertfordshire County because he has heard a guard was bitten. A guard checks his identity at the entrance and leads him through a tunnel where a priest examines his naked body to ensure he has not been bitten. Finally, he is allowed into the house, where Lady Featherstone is playing cards with friends. She swears that no one here is bitten and that no zombies have entered her estate in years. Pretending she wants to play too, Darcy sits at a table. He pulls out a jar full of flies and releases them into the room while explaining that they can detect decaying flesh. The flies circle for a second before landing on a man, meaning he is slowly turning into a zombie. Darcy immediately smashes his jar and stabs the man in the face before decapitating him with his blade. Then Darcy asks if this man could have infected anyone else in the house. Featherstone denies it, so Darcy kicks the zombie's head to shock the guests as he leaves. However, Featherstone's daughter refuses to keep lying and rushes upstairs to check on the victim's niece. Unfortunately, it is too late. The girl has already turned and attacks the staff, now also attacking Featherstone's daughter. Meanwhile, Mr. Bennet has been training his 5 daughters in every weapon and martial art known to man so they can defend themselves against zombies. However, Mrs. Bennet is not happy about it and wants them to focus on getting married. When Mrs. Bennet hears about an upcoming ball, she convinces her husband to let them go as a treat. All the sisters are excited except Elizabeth, who is not a fan of social gatherings. They all don their finest dresses, but still ensure they have hidden weapons on them. Later at the party, Bingley is chatting with Darcy but freezes when he sees Jane fall in love with him at once. He immediately asks her to dance, and they have a delightful time together. Afterwards, Bingley insists that Darcy also dance and tells him to ask Elizabeth, but Darcy says she is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me. Elizabeth overhears and steps away, only to accidentally knock over a bottle and embarrass herself in front of everyone. Outside, Elizabeth begins to cry, but is interrupted by Featherstone, who has become a zombie. She can still speak and wants to tell Elizabeth something. However, Darcy shoots her in the head first. Hearing the shot, a group of people comes out to see what happened. At that moment, another zombie appears and the guards ring a bell to announce an attack. While most guests run off to hide, the Bennet sisters draw their weapons and begin fighting the zombies. They strike each creature with sword cuts and well-delivered kicks. Seeing Elizabeth fight causes Darcy to start feeling attracted to her. Once all the zombies' bodies are burned, the sisters return home. Jane cannot stop talking about Bingley, while Elizabeth keeps lamenting Darcy's manners and pride as she trains. The next day, Jane receives an invitation to tea with Bingley. Mrs. Bennet makes her ride on horseback instead of traveling by carriage, so that if it rains, she can stay the night. On her way, dogs run by because they are being chased by a zombie. Jane prepares to fire, but her horse gets spooked and throws her off before running away. Jane tries to shoot, but the musket misfires, injuring her hand. When the zombie finally attacks her, Jane draws her knife and fights hand-to-hand, quickly cutting off the zombie's hands and severing its legs. Once it falls, she kicks it in the chest and stomps on its head to kill it. As it starts to rain, Jane notices a zombie mother carrying an infected baby in her arms approaching her. The next day, Elizabeth arrives at Bingley's house. It turns out they found Jane with a fever, so she spent the night there. Elizabeth comes to see her. However, Darcy is worried that Jane might be infected. While a doctor examines Jane, Darcy releases the carrier flies. The little insects do not Jane, and Elizabeth easily traps them, then crushes them in her fist before handing them back to Darcy with a sarcastic comment. Afterwards, Jane joins Bingley and his guests but declines his invitation to play cards, saying she prefers to read. A discussion arises about what makes a true woman, and Darcy is unsure whether he is impressed or offended. That night, Elizabeth secretly observes Darcy training outside. The next day, the rest of the Bennet sisters and their mother come to fetch Jane and Elizabeth. Bingley wants them to stay, but Darcy reminds him of the infection risks. He has another argument with Elizabeth, revealing that he knows she watched him the night before. To keep everyone happy, Mrs. Bennet convinces Bingley to organize a ball to lift spirits. On the way home, they notice that the local orphanage has fallen, and now the orphaned children are roaming the forest as... Sometime later, Mr. Bennet introduces his family to their cousin Collins, who will inherit the estate when Mr. Bennet dies because women cannot inherit. At lunch, Collins tells them his patron is Lady Catherine, who possesses an incredible Chinese sword that performed wonders during the war against zombies. He also shows interest in Jane, but Mrs. Bennet immediately refuses, saying Jane already has Bingley and offering Elizabeth instead. In the afternoon, Collins and the sisters set out to visit their aunt, but stop along the way when they find a fallen cart and a woman screaming for help. The sisters prepare their weapons, and when the woman emerges, they open fire because she is a zombie. Jane finishes it off by kicking her over a cliff as they continue the journey. Elizabeth struggles to carry all her gear, but Collins puts it back in her arms instead of helping. When they arrive in town, they notice new soldiers assigned to protect the area. Elizabeth meets Lieutenant Wickham, and they immediately get along. Darcy, riding nearby, becomes jealous when he sees them, so he leaves without saying a word. Wickham tells Elizabeth that he and Darcy are not on good terms due to family money issues. That night, everyone attends the ball. Jane spends time with Bingley. Elizabeth tries to chat with Wickham, but Collins drags her onto the dance floor, showing a lot of energy and enthusiasm. Darcy then asks Elizabeth to dance as well, but Collins makes the moment awkward, forcing them apart. As they leave, Darcy hears Mrs. Bennet talking about Jane's future with Bingley, emphasizing his money. Meanwhile, Elizabeth bumps into Bingley, and then they both hear a noise. They turn to see a servant being attacked by a zombie. The pair grab axes and follow it downstairs. However, the zombie grabs Bingley, knocking him down. Elizabeth slides down immediately and fells the zombie before checking on her friend. But when she looks up, she discovers all the orphaned zombie children hiding below. She asks them how they snuck in, and a boy says his new friend showed them the way. At that moment, Darcy arrives and begins fighting the zombies, quickly defeating them with fast sword cuts and the help of a kitchen knife. One zombie is even shoved into an oven. Then Darcy asks if Bingley was bitten and prepares to kill him, but Elizabeth assures him that Bingley simply fell. As they leave, Elizabeth tells Darcy that he is an excellent warrior, but a poor friend. The next day, Jane receives a letter from Bingley, explaining that his family is moving back to London, and that he will begin courting Darcy's sister instead. At lunch, Collins asks Elizabeth to marry him, but she would have to give up her weapons and never fight zombies again. Elizabeth refuses and rushes outside to release her frustrations by training. Her mother scolds her for rejecting such an important proposal, but her father respects her decision. Elizabeth hugs her father in gratitude while her mother continues scolding. So, Elizabeth heads into the forest to find some peace. In the woods, Elizabeth notices a flock of birds flying over 4 men wearing top hats. She is then approached by Wickham, and when she turns around, the 4 men have disappeared. Wickham saw nothing before inviting her to a special place. Moments later, they arrive at a church where a priest is reading a sermon. When the crowd turns, Elizabeth is shocked to see they are all zombies. Wickham stops her before she can draw her weapons. They watch as the priest feeds the zombies pig brains. It turns out those infected do not fully transform into zombies, but instead eat human brains, and Wickham believes this is the key to reaching an understanding between zombies and humans. Elizabeth agrees and says they should bring the idea to the crown. However, Wickham explains that the war almost bankrupted the country, so there's no one to turn to for help. Sometime later, a friend of Elizabeth's tells her she is engaged to Collins and asks her to come as her maid to meet her fiancé's parents at Collins' estate. Elizabeth enjoys looking at a painting that shows Catherine killing Lucifer. There is also a painting of the 4 zombie horsemen who are said to appear when the end is near. Elizabeth realizes these are the men she saw in the woods. Finally, she meets Catherine and her daughter. Elizabeth is surprised to see Darcy there as well and learns he is Catherine's nephew. Wickham arrives, because Elizabeth invited him to ask for the money he needs for his plan. Catherine thinks the idea of befriending zombies is ridiculous and that they will never listen to a leader. But Collins points out that the Bible says the Antichrist will lead the undead. Darcy agrees with Catherine's opinion and becomes angry when Wickham mentions his father. So he has the guards throw Wickham out. That night, Darcy spends a long time training outside to deal with his anger. Elizabeth cannot sleep because her friend snores, so she goes for a walk in the gardens where she finds Wickham. He has come to tell her that Darcy drove the Bingley family away by saying Jane was only after his money. Wickham also asks Elizabeth to elope together, but she refuses. Before leaving, Wickham reminds her that Judgment Day is near. The next day, Darcy tells Elizabeth he considers her inferior, but still feels attracted to her, so he asks her to marry him. She rejects him and confronts him about what he did to Jane and Bingley, only so that Darcy can defend his intervention. A furious Elizabeth kicks him and hurls objects at him before attacking him with a fire poker. He defends himself quickly, and they end up compromising position on a table. Their argument turns into a large-scale fight, exchanging several blows before ending in another awkward position. When Elizabeth says she will never marry him, Darcy finally leaves. She then has another breakdown. Later, Elizabeth receives a letter from Darcy explaining that he had no intention of hurting Jane. He only sent Bingley away to protect him from the Bennet snares. He also explains that he had to kill his own father when he turned into a zombie, but he still gave Wickham the promised money. However, Wickham kept coming back for more and was offended when Darcy did not want to pay. Then Wickham tried to marry Darcy's teenage sister for money, but Darcy saved her just in time. Finally, Darcy informs Elizabeth that he respects her feelings toward him, so to forget his heartbreak, he has gone to London to fight the last zombie attack. He thinks someone is directing the zombies because the attacks have been too organized. When Elizabeth returns home, she is horrified that Wickham has escaped with Lydia, the youngest sister. She supposes he has taken her to the zombie church. That night, Elizabeth is visited by Catherine, who announces that Darcy will marry her daughter if Elizabeth does not marry Collins. Elizabeth now sees Darcy in a better light, but is still uncertain about a relationship. Then Catherine challenges her to a duel against her guard. The man is large and strong, so he throws quite dangerous punches and easily blocks Elizabeth's attacks. She refuses to surrender even when he chokes her and rakes her face before breaking her arm. With an excellent kick, she hurls him against a beam that breaks and causes part of the ceiling to collapse. Catherine corners Elizabeth with their swords, but admits she respects Elizabeth's determination. At that moment, Mr. Bennet enters the room to forbid Elizabeth from rescuing her sister because it is too dangerous. Catherine then offers to house the Bennets at her estate so that Jane and Elizabeth can go. When the duo reach the bridge, soldiers block them and inform them that they have prepared many explosives. The bridge will be blown up tomorrow at dawn to stop the horde of zombies from entering London. The sisters ignore them and continue advancing. Meanwhile, Bingley is on the battlefield, throwing a bomb at the zombies trapped in a trench. But as he is about to leave, a creature grabs him by the scarf. Fortunately, Jane arrives just in time to cut the scarf and push him away from the explosion. Nearby, Darcy kills another zombie with his sword, only to find a pile of undead hands emerging from the ground. After, Elizabeth tells him about her sister in the church, and Darcy has to inform her that the building was burned down 5 days ago, so her sister is probably dead. When Darcy leaves, it is revealed that he lied. He told Elizabeth that the church was demolished to keep her away from danger, but in reality, the building is still intact. He sneaks around the church and sees the 4 zombie horsemen leading a horde of zombies. Meanwhile, Elizabeth continues riding and watches in horror as London burns. At that, she sees Lydia and screams her name, but Lydia is unhurt. The zombie horde appears behind her, and Elizabeth draws her sword to face them. Lydia arrives at the bridge just before the soldiers prepare the detonations. Back in the church, the men continue fighting, and Darcy manages to stab his opponent. However, Wickham is fine because he has been one of the undead all along and has suppressed his hunger for brains thanks to his hatred for Darcy. Wickham explains that the 4 horsemen have risen from hell and that he is the Antichrist who will lead them. He begins savaging Darcy and is about to decapitate him. Elizabeth intervenes, cutting off Wickham's arm and trampling him with her horse. Then the pair escape riding Elizabeth's horse as the horde of zombies chases them. They reach the bridge just as the soldiers activate the bombs, and the sisters think Elizabeth is being killed by the resulting explosions. However, when the smoke clears, Elizabeth is crawling over the debris. She finds Darcy's unconscious body nearby and cries as she kisses him, telling him she loves him. A few days later, Bingley asks Jane to marry him, and she, of course, says yes. Darcy awakens from his coma and Elizabeth that he heard her on the bridge. He proposes to her, and she says yes. Before they kiss, the couples marry together, and Collins officiates the ceremony, happy until they see Wickham approaching with a horde of zombies.
If you want interesting movie recaps, like, share, and subscribe.